Growing up Catholic affected both me and Leah in different ways, but we both orbited around the idea of performance. In this episode, we talk about embodiment, gender, intuition, and the ways spirituality can either disconnect us from ourselves or bring us more deeply into truth. You're listening to Whiplash, a listener-supported podcast exploring Catholicism through the lens of queer liberation theology. I'm Max Kuzma, a transgender man and columnist for the National Catholic Reporter and a board member of Dignity USA. Thank you to the paid Substack subscribers who make this work possible. Today's conversation with Leah Raidt was about moving beyond the usual binaries of staying or leaving religion and instead exploring where the life is within your own spiritual story. Leah and I both come from deeply Catholic backgrounds, and in different ways, we both inherited forms of Catholicism that often prioritized performance over embodiment, certainty rather than discernment, and appearances rather than relationships or encounter. But throughout this conversation, we return again and again to tension, not as something to avoid, but as a place where transformation can actually happen. In many ways, this episode is about mystery and paradox and the search for aliveness inside spiritual practice. And together, we explore the possibility that spirituality can ultimately be a language we use to approach the mysteries that make us human. Love, desire, embodiment, connection, grief, and transformation. Well, I am so excited. Leah, thank you so much for joining me today on Whiplash.
I am so honored to be on the Whiplash podcast.
And I would love to start by maybe let's get like a little context about your religious upbringing, and then we can also maybe talk about the way that we first got connected, which was when you wrote a profile of Sister Louisa.
Yes, great. So I was born and raised in Louisville, Kentucky. It's where my chosen place to live now as well. I joke that I am very culturally Catholic, meaning that my family likes to drink and gamble. But I went to Catholic school my whole life. My grandmothers were very devout Catholics, so grew up going to Mass and being really involved in the church. And then things spiraled out a bit, I would say. Like, I realized my parents were only making us go to Mass because they didn't have the guts to tell their own parents that they didn't want to go. And then there was a scandal at our church, and we got a new priest. And so then everyone started to go to the really short Mass at the nursing home nearby. There's whole stories there. I don't know if you want me to dive in, but it's been quite an evolution.
No, I totally understand. That's good context to start with. And then I know that you also had been living in Chicago for a time, and I'm curious, like the timeline of, you know, your journey from Chicago through Chicago back to Kentucky, and then how that maybe led to that profile with Sister Louisa.
Yes. So I moved to Chicago for college, which I also went to a Catholic college, to DePaul University, and then was in Chicago working as an actor and a teaching artist and a million other things for about 18 years. So I moved back to Kentucky 3 years ago, almost 3 years ago this summer. And when I moved back, a big part of that was because I love this part of Kentucky that's often referred to as Kentucky's Holy Land. There's 3 convents, 2 monasteries, a bunch of rural historic churches, and it's through one of the retreat centers there that I first learned about Sister Louisa and her work. And the Nazareth Retreat Center was inviting me to partner with them to do an LGBTQ meditation retreat. And I learned that they had tried to get Sister Louisa, but she was moving into retirement. And so anyways, before I led that retreat for the first time, I really deep dived into her work and was really moved by her ministry. And so I pitched an article to Queer Kentucky, which is a publication here, and they said yes. And so I got to go meet Sister Louisa and spend a day with her and interview her. And it exceeded all of my expectations. It actually felt like I was really meeting an elder teacher and guide that I was meant to meet. And we have had many lunches since, and we've protested together, and we stay in touch. And if you're listening to this now and you haven't listened to her episode, go listen to her episode.
I love the pitch. Yeah, she is a really incredible person. I remember the first time I met her, it was at the Outreach 2023 conference. And yeah, I definitely had this amazing sense of how could it be that this person who is not trans understands so deeply? And I mean, at the point I was meeting her, she had years and years of ministry experience, but there's often the story that she tells of the first trans person that she met, and how in learning that person's story, listening to that person, that trans person even said, "Hey, you get this. There's something about you, like you understand something about this trans experience." And I think in many ways, like that was the foundation of her ministry.
Yes. I think she understands that, and she also understands what a guide and teacher trans people can be to us on a path towards liberation. And so she brings this respect, reverence, admiration, but also those skills of deep listening and being able to resonate to kind of the core experiences. That's really special, because I know that my fear when I was going to meet her was that she would carry an energy I've encountered in a lot of these spaces, which is really well-meaning, but that it's like, we want to serve the marginalized and oppressed, and you're the gays that are marginalized and oppressed. And also, let me tell you about all the gay people that I know. And it's sweet, but there's a disconnect in those exchanges. And sitting with Sister Louisa and the way that she listens every single time, it has never felt like a disconnect. It feels like there's something that she's pulling out the deepest truths and threads. And I've witnessed it in other people too. My partner's trans, non-binary, and I took them to go meet Sister Louisa, and we had this marvelous day. She gave us an in-depth tour of the grounds, and we were in the space that was like the chapel was being rehabbed, and it was full of all these desks that had come from some other convent, and it had great acoustics. And so we all started like making sounds, and then we ended up having this song circle. Like she sang this song that was so beautiful. And then my partner sang the song, and then, I had to go. And like it's this incredible, like vulnerable exchange all together. And another time I was like, hey, could we just all sit in silence? And we meditated together. And it just felt like a day with friends who want to meditate and sing together.
I love it so much. And that actually kind of connects, like some of those threads in there that you're talking about kind of connect to some other stuff you and I have talked before about, which is just that importance of being able to be embodied and process emotions through movement, and the physicality of being in a certain place, being in nature, being in a particular place in nature, and can you talk a little bit about like some of the importance of moving back to Kentucky and some of those specific places to you?
Yeah, so that area, Kentucky's Holy Land, there were some encounters I was having there as early as 2018. I went on a retreat at Nazareth Retreat Center, mainly picked the place because I wanted to do a retreat and just kind of on my navigating on my own, not being facilitated by anyone. And I knew I wanted to be on Kentucky land, and the goal was that I was going to start processing and going through decades worth of journals, because normally I would finish a journal and throw it in a bin and tell my sister if I die, just burn these. And at one day realized there might be something to learn in here. Like I might actually be a writer since I do write with such devotion and consistency. So I chose this place because it was just so affordable. And then come to find out, it's the same nuns who had started my high school, and there was like a lot of threads there. But there's a pond on that land where I think it was the first like glimpse of an embodied experience of belonging, like being somewhere and knowing almost a feeling of like I've been here, but my body remembers this place in some way. And it's a place that I just felt called to return to. I experienced something similar on the hill at the Abbey of Gethsemane, and then later learned that my family ancestors who come like from right down the street from there. But I kind of refer to these different places as my own personal axis mundi, like these sacred portals, because they do feel like a place that are holding all the expansiveness and also all the like contractedness that I feel around Catholicism, and my spirituality and gender and just who I was, who I am, who I'm growing into be. It's like a place where suddenly you're like feeling in your like goosebump wise, like all of that is there at once.
It feels like you have had a movement. So you've had physical movement from one area of the country to another area of the country, but you've also had like, I'm wondering, this is, I think, more of a question than a statement. I'm wondering if it has been like, I'm hearing a lot about Catholic school, and in my mind, I'm like that. When I think of Catholic school in that way, I think of it, it's very formal and maybe more rigid and maybe more rules, maybe. And I'm curious, because moving into an embodied space maybe feels more expansive. Does that feel like kind of a movement that you have been through?
Oh, yeah. So Catholic school, I mean, I resonate with like the archetype of the troublemaker or the punk or like, so Catholic school was, I think, I can see now that Catholicism as a whole serves me in this way. But Catholic school was very clear that it was like a wall I could push up against. Like it actually built my discernment and critical thinking because it felt so fun to want to debate or push holes in, to the religion teacher, to the point where for my religion class, my sophomore, junior year, we had to do service hours, and I learned that you could be like a kind of serve as like a human like barrier to help people go into an abortion clinic. And it was in a really charged area where protesters would come. And so this is what I chose to do for my service hours. And on the day I did that, a busload of children were brought in across the street with rosaries and signs, and there were many protesters, and there was a priest there pointing straight at me, his finger in my face, and said, "There's blood on your hands too." And yet the embodied experience I'm having in this day, and at this time, I did not even know where I stood on abortion. I was in a lot of questioning, but I wasn't firm on where I stood at all. I just felt like the most Christian thing I could imagine doing would be helping someone like safely get in here. Like this, I was like, I'm Simon of Cyrene over here. Like that, I really was like, I am feeling like this is so spiritual and so important. And this man is telling me there's evil. And yet if he saw me in my school uniform walk by on the sidewalk, he would be treating me so differently. He would have something. So, he wouldn't have anything bad to say. He put on a really friendly face. So it was such a formative experience. And then my teacher didn't honor the service hours, and I got a failing grade in that portion. And it was 20% of our grade. So it was like the first time I got a C, which was really hard for me. But it was like teaching me this sense of like righteousness for myself and like authentically. And it was putting me in a place where I could really examine these questions and challenge them with others that was really generative. And I think that's what the church continues to give me. It is that wall that I can push against, and it's a friction that ultimately can expand me. If I can open my heart to hold all of that and to be with all of it and to sit in the questions that are that big and unanswerable.
I think the biggest thing that I thought of from what you just said was I was thinking about how, for me, before transition, I definitely felt like in that performative type of religion, specific Catholicism, specifically, like you were saying, like how he would relate to you so differently if he just saw you in your school uniform. I kind of felt like that was the whole type of Catholicism that I was in. Like, it was all like that, because definitely that was messaging I was getting within my own family was, we have expectations of how you are going to show up at church, and what you look like at church almost matters more than how you act other way. Like whether or not you embarrass us in public is more important to us, rather than you're actually like being good or whatever. Like, and that was another thing I thought of too. And what you were saying is like, again, it's like a flattened, I always think of it as like a flattened moral imagination, where it's like, there isn't really the opportunity to use discernment because you're just expected to already have the answers. Like, he already viewed you. He already had an idea of who you were. You were evil specifically because of where you were like standing. Like, literally, you were just physically standing there, and that made you evil in that moment. Yeah, I feel like there's just so much in that.
Yes, what you said made me think there's a line in a poem that I wrote that is like everybody else, line up, eat bodies of Christ, walk back to your pew feeling stared at. Because I think my early years, my experience of church, when I really think about it, it was the sense of being looked at and perceived. And what was I doing? I'm not praying when after I did communion. I'm like, what's everybody wearing? What do I have to like, who's here today? Like, that's literally what was instilled in me. And now it's so interesting because I'm so clear that like I'm in pursuit of places and community. And even like I found a church here, St. William's, that is, I think does this so well, that if I'm going to go engage in spiritual practice with everybody, at the end of the day, after that experience, I want to feel like I have been touched in some way, or that like I am leaving different than who I was when I came in. There's been some sort of balm. A fire's been lit. I had a really clear moment of connection with somebody. I feel clearer of something. And I feel this way about meditation practice too. It's like we practice because so you can change your state. And there is this staleness that what you're talking about, where it's like we just do it, but nothing is actually changing. Where is the aliveness? Where is the tension? Where is like the real relationality even? And St. William's, I think, just tackles that so well because of a number of reasons, but like they don't have their altar is on the same level as everybody else. They've taken patriarchal language and made it more inclusive. The priest often doesn't give the homily. A lay person does that. There's like an embodied gesture that everybody does to consecrate the host together. When it's the sign of peace, they have to play music to gather everybody out because it becomes a party. Everyone starts walking around to see their people. And I don't go even that often. And every time I go, it's like someone makes such an effort to look me or my partner in the eye, to welcome us genuinely, like to invite us into something that they're so active also in social justice and activism. So it's like you're literally practicing what you're preaching, and I can see that. And so that makes me more willing to want to go into that space. But
I love everything you're saying, just so you know.
Yep.
I have two paths in my mind. This is what happens when you talk to people who have like fun, creative minds that are similar to your own. You're just like, oh, I could go in 1,000 directions right now.
I always say as the ADHD thing, I'm like, okay, I'm having 5 different impulses at the same time. Which one do I want to follow?
Yes, because part of me is still thinking deeply about and mostly this is just because I just always am thinking deeply about this, which is this rigidity versus openness as a fundamental orientation towards life, and how intense, if you have put your camp in one of those, how intensely that will shape your life. Like, and just so many things about rigidity where it's like, I just feel like people, like, maybe it starts with, fear. There's a lot of discussions of fear and shame, I think, when people talk about this stuff, where it's like the fear of, well, it's totally different. It's totally new. I don't know how to relate to that because it has nothing to do with what I've ever known. So like maybe it starts in sort of like that fear-based space, but I have seen it slowly shut people down more and more over time, because the problem is, if you are moving from that rigidity and from that fear and from that binary simplified way of looking at the world, there's really no other choice but to have it slowly impact other parts of your life and other ways of thinking. Like it's going to limit you. You're slowly shutting down your access to the rest of the world, to other people, to solutions you might not have been able to consider. I mean, that's like my whole thing with DEI and the political rage and debate about all that, is like, everyone is looking at it from the perspective of who is deserving of an opportunity. But if you set that part aside for a second, it just seems obvious to me. I mean, partially, from science and evolution, we see that diversity is where developments come from that actually strengthen things, make things better. But also because it just seems like common sense that like having those more perspectives will make things better, because it's not just about like living in an ivory tower or in a monolith, like, oh, only our culture is the good one, and we don't want to let the other cultures in because our culture is the best one. It's not just like a cultural thing. It's like not everybody is the same. So not everybody is going to like all the same things. And like, wouldn't you rather live in a world where we can be comfortable with being different? Like, where instead of having to have that level of friction of like, you're not like me, so I'm pushing you out. I just feel that, yeah, I'm just ranting a little bit about this.
Oh, I hear you, and I love your rants, and it's making me, when I think of the rigidity, that has always shown up for me, and you're not allowed, right? Like you're not allowed to, you have to wear this skirt to school. You're not allowed to, girls can't be priests or whatever it is. I mean, when I got that gold book for First Communion and it has a script for the mass in it, my brother had a priest costume and I was donning the vestments, and my mom was giving me a cup and we were putting it into Wonder Bread and I was performing mass at a young age. And it makes me think, never once did I think this, I might become a priest because of the rigidity. Because I already knew. I wasn't even going to think that. Because of the rigidity, no one in my family would say, Leah, one day you might maybe you're like ordained in some way. Maybe you have this like call. No, because they couldn't see it. Because girls aren't allowed to be priests in the and I look at that's one example of like, that became so pervasive in my life. It took until my mid-20s before I could recognize the part of me that is ordained, that could have considered that as a path. People could have seen it and affirmed it in me if they had the openness and the ability to do so. And instead, all it has nurtured is the sense of I'm not allowed, like doors being closed on me, and then having to fight to prove, to defend my choices, to prove that. And then that also puts you in a position where you can't do any wrong. And that has been such a pattern in my life where something I know to be right for me or authentic or the call that I'm feeling, there's all these other obstacles, or there's family members or whatever saying like, well, you're never going to be able to do that. And I'm like actively having to disengage now the parts of me that are so armored up and ready to fight you, to defend, and can't ask for help or think all these other things, because that's the way that it got set up, when like we could all just see what a child is showing you are their gifts and affirm them,
You're not able to perceive or receive the gifts that someone has, because you're so busy thinking, okay, it can only be this way. I know it can only exist this way. So I'm refusing to see anything that it would be possible outside of that. Oh my gosh, again, with a million thoughts. I was going to talk about being trans as well. In what you were saying about like, you kind of touched on that tension, but the way you expressed it made me think of the embodied part of it. And like with the trans experience, for me, it was so much of so many people doubling down and always trying to reinforce you are a woman, you are feminine, when that was at such odds, was in so much tension and conflict with what I actually was feeling in my body. But being taught, it was like the words and the words were not matching the experience, because it was like, so God is love, and, God made you on purpose and all this stuff, but also don't listen to the experience of your body that you're actually feeling, because no, you can't be a man. You can't be a man. And that's really like the biggest, the biggest thing that is the pushback from people, is like, you cannot be a man. Even now, like, you are not allowed to be a man. Anyway, that's like a whole sidebar. But my main point is just that, is that tension between like people saying something to me and then that not resonating in my body. So like, if I had let that go on, it's just like, it's just layers of harm, because when you don't trust your body, when you don't trust your intuition, it sets you up to be harmed, honestly, because you need all those things from your body. Sorry, go ahead.
I think like it's so sad to look back, and at no point in my upbringing was anyone like, does this feel good for you? Like, does this feel good for me? Like, what might I want? Like, when it came to like starting to date and become sexually active, there was never anything. It was just, I was getting celebrated or meeting these perceived marks of like, oh, I checked that off the box, as if they were to be celebrated, and they were by other people. So then it just becomes this mind game of like, well, I guess this is it. And when in hindsight, I'm like, I didn't consent to any of that, really. I didn't like any of that. And how come nobody told me, like, no one taught that I like was an active participant? Because and wow, of course not from my Catholic family, because guess what? Women have never been an active participant. I've always just been this like throwaway object. And then to couple, like, it's like, then I think the gender stuff for me, like, and with the church is also just so interesting, because then I'm also like, I go to retreat at Gethsemane, for example. And if you are a man, then you get to go, you could have options to stay in these rooms that are on like the monk's side. And my partner has stayed over there and was like, they bake their own bread. And then there's all these signs that are saying, you're not allowed back. Like, you can't go past this way, this only. And it's like all the parts of me that are like a bro are like raging inside because I'm like, I belong back there. I should have access. Like, don't they know? And then it's like, why do I want to be in this club that doesn't want me anyways? Which is a whole other thing. But it's just so funny because I think that it's the rage of like the woman's experience and not being allowed. And then the rage of like, oh, you don't even see the part of me that does belong, and you can't see it and should be allowed, and you still can't see it. And now I'm going to be mad about that.
Yeah, definitely. Again, it feels like a lack of imagination so much, especially when like the church has such a incredible history of like really crazy, really crazy saints, really crazy mystical people. And and yet you're going to turn around and be so limited and so boring. I don't know.
I know. I'm like, if St. Francis of Assisi was on retreat here, he'd be naked the whole time and like sleeping under the tree. Let's go. But I also think just back to like the innocence, like I had such an innocent, beautiful, imaginative spiritual life as a kid. I prayed the rosary every night in 3rd grade. Like, I'm really one of those people who this seeking and this part of me has been so alive through my whole life, but it literally got super tamped down and closeted. And for a while, it became something I would dismiss myself because we get abandoned by the church, or by people who can't see and affirm. And so then it does become this reclaiming and this remembering and like this whole thing that you can see the seeds were there all along. And yeah, I do like to envision a world where that we don't have to go through that pain point to get back to the whimsy and the innocence and the imagination of a robust spiritual life again. But those saints that you're talking about, like all the times in my life that I feel like, I am pushing up against something or like there these obstacles or whatever, I'm thinking about like I had students working on a play. My Name is Rachel Corrie, which is a documentary play about a peace activist in Palestine, and got some pushback at the institution where I was working. And I just thought, when I really sit with like lineage, tradition, roots, like it's the prophets, it's the outsiders, it's the like spiritual orphans that speak to me. And were they ever in a place where they maybe weren't encountering some of that pushback or that resistance or punishment or whatever it might be? No, they were. And so I spent I kind of had this reframe where it was like, I can celebrate that. Like, it can be okay that I'm getting a C in the religion class because like deep down, I feel so strong and good and fired up and proud, because that's who I come from. Like, that's whose legacy I'm walking forward are these prophets and these saints and these mystics that are our family.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I also feel like that might kind of speak to the other thread that I feel here. That was one of the million directions my brain was going, which is kind of this zoomed out idea of what spirituality is for, or what is it? What is the point of it? And that was, for me, that was a big thing, because in accepting my trans identity, I had a whole long process of like, okay, so if the type of Catholicism and the worldview that I have accepted up until now did not allow transition, and if I allow myself to transition, what else how am I going to reevaluate like all these other messages, basically? That's kind of like a short version. And part of that for me was trying to understand, because I still felt I definitely still felt Catholic. Like I felt like Catholicism was something that was kind of like part of me in maybe in a cultural way, maybe in just like because it had been from my whole life, like in an inherent way.
I related to what the person you interviewed, the Jewish person, said. That's how I feel about Catholicism. It's just like in my blood, and it's something I can't really extract. I don't feel I have a choice about it culturally, and just like these are the things, the practices I'm going to keep coming back to because they do have that embedded history with them.
Yeah. Yeah, like they shaped our way of thinking about these spiritual things in that way. Like I'm going to always be drawn to the big stained glass windows and the incense, not just because it's pretty, not like in like oh, this is so aesthetic, but like in like those symbols resonate with me because they're part of that language that's kind of like baked in. And then the second piece is what spirituality is for. So like if it's true that I have this, if it's true that I have this cultural Catholicism, this inherent cultural Catholic identity, what exactly is the spiritual part? Like because there are these experiences that human beings have that are mysterious and ineffable. I mean, even just the most cliche basic experiences of like falling in love. Like falling in love is like deeply mysterious in many, many ways. Like, why did you fall in love with that person? Why is that person have these things in common with you, but then connect you to these other things that you could have never imagined? Like there are mysteries, I think, is what I'm trying to say in life. And to me, I think spirituality is the language of those mysteries. So whatever format that spirituality takes in the particular person or the particular culture, I feel like that is where that language is. And then I guess what I'm building to is I'm wondering if for you there's a connection with the way that you were talking about this tension, like spirituality as tension. I feel like there's some overlap between my conceptualization and yours, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I love this definition you're working with as spirituality, like as to be in mystery and perhaps even paradox. I think the tension point for me is it's about helping me hold paradox. What spirituality is for, like the reason I practice meditation, or any of the other spiritual practices that I feel are to help me remember who I am, like to get in touch with like the divinity within me and and that is interconnected in everybody, so that I can show up in service to like meet the need of the time. And that idea of the being in the mystery or the paradox, like that's those moments I think where you're in these charged spaces where all of it is there for you. Like yesterday, I went to a city Louisville Metro Council meeting because they were going to vote. They're putting forward a trans safe haven ordinance. And the auditorium was full. And I would say it was probably majority opposition and then folks like me who were there in support. And I was like, this is what I practice for. And this space is a place to practice, because I like sat down, and the whole row right behind me were all opposition people. This woman had a shirt on that said freedom. And I said, oh, hi, I love your shirt. That's so cute. And oh, thanks. But I sat down and I made friends with the people next to me and was like, I got to ground, because I'm already like welling up with emotion just in feeling into what this space is. And all at once, I can feel the rage that we're outnumbered by people who've decided it's worth their time to show up and to put their signs in their Bible to prevent a law that would just say we're not going to discriminate under these circumstances. So there's like the rage there. There's how touched I feel by the other folks that I am seeing, by the way my heart feels it's breaking, seeing like these trans folks, the fact that this is validation, why I moved to Kentucky. It's like expanding my heart and breaking my heart all at the same time. And I'm attuned to all the other energies that really like aren't even mine, but are like this collective chaos that's happening. And that there's no place in the world I'd rather be. Like, that is the place for me to practice. And that is the place for me to, like, I was trying to like transmit love to everybody. And yes, also still honor like the heartbreaking feelings I was having and at the same time. But that's why I practice. It's like, feels like my personal responsibility to equip myself as best as possible to be of service. And I also know that I carry like I'm a bridge in a lot of ways when it comes to LGBTQ issues. Like, I am a person who is privileged enough to put myself in certain circumstances that I wouldn't wish upon my partner or other friends of mine. But I'm I'm that person, and I'm the ally to do that so that they don't have to put themselves at risks in those ways. And I know my superpower is that I can find a point of connection with anybody and everybody. So if I can be a doorway into someone's ability to see our dignity and humanity, then there we go. That's my job.
And I any day of the week would choose that path as well that you're talking about, this path of being able to truly inhabit the life that is yours. Like, I think it's like, there's a saying of like, just, your life is the curriculum. So in you living out your life, you are learning the lessons and doing the things that you need to do. I would much rather choose that any day of the week than have all the most beautiful sayings in the world. Like, well, of course, God loves everyone. But doing a lot of work there. I would much rather choose this embodied way rather than kind of having these prescriptive sayings that shut down the actual humanity of people. It's like, well, I know better than you because I know that you have human dignity and I know what you need and da 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 da. And it's like, hold on a minute. Like, let's let people have their own lives. Let's let people express who they are. Let's let's actually listen and be curious. I feel like there's such a lack of curiosity and building into the openness. The openness is the value that I was singing the praises of earlier, but also just the very basic level of not being curious about the world around you or other people or other ways of doing things. Like, there's just so much more, like, believing that God created this whole world, this whole planet. There are orders of magnitudes of things that we don't know or understand about it. I would think that if you believed God made it, you would be deeply curious and respectful and wanting to encounter that,
Yeah. Yeah. What you're saying is making me think of, I think a lot about like prayer and like what it looks like for people and how it changes or what it is, or right, your question of like, what is spirituality for? Like what is prayer for? And I see, I'm always questioning, like, do I want praying for other people to even be part of my prayer practice? Because I feel like I've witnessed this a number of times. I was in India recently and was with a bunch of Indian sisters and was praying with them a lot. And this is where this started kind of forming for me. But oftentimes, the prayers were, for the community and that we would get more people to convert. And I just started to think like they were praying for these outcomes based for other people that we're not really even giving them choice or agency in. But like, what happens when the prayer becomes like, help me see the part of me that is that woman sitting behind me in the thing? help me show, like, find some connection, even though this person clearly like wants to harm the people I care about most and myself. Like, I guess I'm just prayer being something that it's like should always be turning us back inwardly versus an outward wishing things weren't as they were. Prayer as a way to get clearer on what actually is and find acceptance around it, or offer it up the confusion, or to go into like the mystery or the question that's at the bottom of it all. But I think that the rigidity and like the closing off of the openness, sometimes it's like it shows up and it gets validated through what we think are the spiritual practices that are opening us or connecting us.
Totally. And I also want to say that makes me think of what you're saying about being a bridge as well, because I really do feel like when the irony is that external focus is not productive, but the internal one is. Because when I am able to do that, when I am able to be grounded in an extremely chaotic or dangerous or scary situation, my grounding actually will impact other people and help ground them. I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm not saying you're gonna like always be perfectly safe if you're able to do this. I'm just saying I have seen the concrete examples of how that peace, that inner cultivation, it has insane ripple effects, and also ripple effects that you can't even quantify. Like, you know, you can pray specifically, I want this specific person to be converted. And so that's like a very quantifiable thing in your mind. Like, okay, I can track their progress and are they converting or not? And then I know if my prayer is answered. But so it's a paradigm, right? But when you are having this internal, peace and grounding and focusing on how you can show up in the world in ways that are more open and more true and more at peace with everything else and more accepting, the impacts of that are not quantifiable at all. It's like, you know, you might see some stranger in the grocery store, and the way that you smiled at them impacts them in ways that you can't even quantify.
Yeah, you can't give what you don't have. And so if we're not cultivating and finding a felt sense of safety in ourselves, or accessing peace in some way, or joy, all those things, then we can't exude them out. And you're speaking also to being like a responsible co-regulator of a space. And that's how we are as leaders. And like in all, I've, you know, have directed and produced films, and like the work then becomes like, how can I facilitate from a really grounded place and from a place that's responsible, because my energy is because I've also been like the actor in the rooms where the director and the stage manager are like a terrible divorced couple. It's so tense and everyone's walking on eggshells. And so, yeah, I think it becomes down to like how we're in relation, like with each person, but mostly and starting with ourselves.
Oh man, I just love this conversation. This is the kind of stuff that I get really excited about.
Me too. This is why I love your podcast. It always feels good when you're like, wait, there's another like queer person out there who wants to, I mean this in all the great ways, like nerd out on this stuff. Like, I mean, it's so fun. I listen to your podcast with my partner, and I listen to the ones about the medieval monks, and like that sent them on a whole research trip that then has impacted some of their artwork. And it just is, again, like ways your work is rippling out that you probably don't even see. But it's really feels like so exciting when I can meet folks at these intersections.
I totally agree. As we get closer to the end of this conversation, is there anything you would like to add or include based on everything we've talked about? Like any point that you'd like to leave or anything like that?
Yeah, I definitely want to refer folks and let folks know about a trans rosary circle that I participate in sometimes. It's hosted by Jonah Welch, and it's just a really sweet space. We pray the rosary together and prayer circle. It's very like come and go as you please. And so if folks wanted to get on the mailing list for that, it's typically on Sundays at 12 Eastern, I think. They can do that I can send them the information. What else? The other one, I also wanted to tell people if they were a LGBTQ author who writes and grew up in like Kentucky's Holy Land and around the Abbey of Gethsemane. His name is Fenton Johnson, and reading his work has given me this same like spark and aliveness, like when I meet people like you. And he has some beautiful books. Keeping Faith is one where he talks extensively about being with the monks, and also it's like a Buddhism, Catholicism comparative study mixed in with like his queerness. And I just finding his work really opened up this space for me a lot. So those are my like shout out moments.
I love it. And then if people want to like connect with you, where should they go and what have you got going on?
I'm trying to build my Substack better, so you can come join me over there. But I am on social media as well. And some things that if you wanted to work with me, I host a weekly meditation club. It's free or by donation. And so we check in about all things meditation, contemplation related, and then there's a guided practice. So I would love for folks to join that. And then I also will be leading an LGBTQ meditation and spiritual reclamation retreat at Nazareth Retreat Center. I joke that it's the queer takeover of the nun convent. And that's in June, the first weekend, June 5th through 7th. There's only a few spots left right now, but then we'll go on to a wait list. And I would love any of your listeners to come to that.
And if people want to like find this stuff, should they go to your website?
Yeah, my website is kind of under construction right now, but it has a link to my link tree, and all the links are on my link tree. So you can find that either through my Instagram at LRaidt or leahraidt.com.
Can you just spell it for people too, for the listeners?
Leah Raidt, Leah, Raidt, RAID, as in dog, T, as in trans people are sacred.
.com?
.com, yeah.
Okay.
And then on Instagram, it's just at LRaidt.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I'm so glad that we connected through knowing Sister Louisa, and I really appreciated having you on today.
Yeah, and she told me about your work too. So it's like you commented, but then she was also showing me yours and Emma's Substacks when we were meeting. So I love Sister Louisa for also being the bridge and connector.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for listening to this conversation with Leah Raidt. Spirituality is not meant to flatten us or disconnect us from ourselves, but to deepen our capacity for honesty, embodiment, and relationship. If this conversation resonated with you, I'd love for you to share the episode, leave a review, or send it to someone else navigating questions around faith, identity, or belonging. And as always, thank you for being part of these conversations with me.